If you've been writing for more than 5 minutes, chances are you've heard the show don't tell piece of advice. And I suppose if you've been writing for less than 5 minutes, you've now also heard it because I just told it to you. Despite the importance of this advice, there is still a lot of confusion and misunderstanding surrounding it. So to help alleviate some of that confusion, I've prepared 5 alternative ways to phrase this venerable piece of writing advice. These alternative ways get at the core message of show don't tell in slightly different ways and highlight different elements of the advice. Hopefully this will help alleviate some of the confusion around this crucial yet often misunderstood piece of writing advice. Speaking of confusion, if you like this video, consider sharing it with someone you know. They'll be really confused and say things like, "This is what you spend your time watching?" Alright, the first way to reframe show don't tell is infer don't relate. The most profound idea that you ever convey to your reader will be caused by your writing, not directly stated by it. In other words, the reader will infer this idea rather than you directly relating it to them. Say you have a detective character that you want to get across as clever. Probably the worst way to do this is to directly call the character clever, directly refer to them as being clever. This is not a very profound way to deliver the information because it's simply a fact being related to the reader. If instead you have the detective piece together some evidence in an intelligent way, or they catch a suspect in an interrogation by using some kind of trick, then the reader will come to realize that the character is clever. They will infer it based on the scenes the character is in. The reader reaching this conclusion on their own will make the writing more impactful than just getting the information directly told to them. One exercise that you can do here specifically related to characters is list out all the major traits of your characters and then see if those words directly appear in your manuscript. If you're describing the character using the words that describe their traits, then you are likely relating information rather than letting the reader infer it. Your writing might be telling instead of showing. Next up, concrete versus abstract language. Good writing needs to be grounded. It needs to use sensory information to describe the scene or what characters are feeling. In this way, writing is said to be concrete. Concrete language contrasts with abstract language. Abstractions deal with logical approximations of bigger ideas. We wrap an abstract concept around a more nebulous idea in order to more easily process it in a logical way. Abstractions describe the logical ideas we can extract from a concrete experience. Concrete language describes that actual experience. Can you not attack my hand? Love is a very abstract idea. The tingle that goes up your back when your lover holds your hand is a concrete description of the experience of love. At least I think it is. I've never been in love. Well, I've been in love, but the other person. Concrete language conveys experience, whereas abstraction conveys logical ideas. Showing the reader an experience through concrete language is generally more engaging than telling it to them through a logical abstraction. Telling the reader a character is in love uses abstraction. Showing them holding hands or kissing or buying each other fried chicken or whatever shows this love through a concrete experience. I'm trying to advance my notes. Next up, tell small stories, not big ones. This has to do with the scale of what you're describing through your story and the scale that events are happening at. You can describe a big momentous event like the Black Plague or a world war using very concrete language and not a lot of abstractions. But even if you use concrete language to describe something like this, it will be difficult for the reader to get engaged. Instead, it's often better to describe a smaller part of a bigger story, which also conveys the feeling or message of the bigger story. Instead of describing the havoc across an entire continent, describe the devastation to one family or one village. Focus on smaller details rather than larger ones. This has to do with aligning the scale of your story with the scale that your reader experiences the world in. You can only sense and experience what's happening directly around you. That's all you can naturally see. You can understand these bigger ideas, but you can't viscerally experience them. If a person is in a burning building, they can understand the idea that 3 stories of that building are totally engulfed in an inferno, but all they can experience is the smoke leaking into the room they're in. That is their personal experience of a larger event. A bigger story doesn't necessarily mean that the writing is telling, but a small story, or at least putting the focus on smaller details, more closely aligns that story with how the reader experiences their world, which will tend to lead to more engaging writing. Next up, make sure your writing is slow rather than fast. One thing that really differentiates told writing from shown writing is speed, or rather length. Speed in the sense that it takes longer to get details across in a showy way versus a telly way. It takes longer to give the reader information for them to infer a conclusion than it does to just relate that conclusion directly to them. Concrete descriptions often take longer to convey than abstract ideas. A scene that shows 2 characters in love through concrete writing is going to take way longer than just having an abstract statement that these 2 characters are in love. Another place where this slow versus fast dichotomy comes in is with emotions. Emotions are weird in that they can come upon us very quickly, but somewhat paradoxically, it often takes some time for an emotion to be engaged. If you want to creep out your reader by having a character walk into a dark, deserted, former insane asylum at midnight, will require the character slowly moving through the scene, hearing a different sound that is either a creaking pipe or a quiet, eerie moan. They need to see shadows moving across the ground, which they tell themselves is just a tree branch in the wind, except that this is a calm night with nary a breath of wind. Getting those details across takes time, it takes page space, whereas just telling the reader that the abandoned asylum is creepy takes a lot less time, it takes a lot less page space. Slowly getting details across gives the reader's emotions a chance to engage, which is usually what you want. Moving through a scene too fast can be a sign that you're verging into telling territory. Showing generally slows things down, giving more detail, which often moves you into a better direction. And lastly, way number 5 to think about show don't tell is make events happen, don't talk about what happened. This one was harder to explain than I thought it would be, and it's actually a little bit subtle, so here goes. Even if you're writing in past tense, where all of the events of your story happened in the past, your writing should describe events happening rather than describing what happened and letting knowledge of the outcome color the writing. Does that make sense? This is very subtle and perhaps more of an emergent property of stories that do everything else well. Fundamentally, what you want is a suspension of the reader's belief that the story is over. You want them to have the feeling that it's happening as they read it, that characters' decisions can still affect the outcome. When you read about something like World War II today, the fact that we know how things played out colors the experience of what you read. It colors your interpretation of events because we know how that particular story ends. Watching the British be forced off the beach at Dunkirk has a much different feeling to it now than it did in 1940 because we know how the rest of the war played out. Our understanding of the ending of the story colors how people write about the war, and it colors how we read about it because we know the outcome. We know that it's a story that's over. You want your writing to capture the feeling at the time of the event when the future is uncertain. That's how you get maximum reader engagement because that's what they are experiencing at the time. A subtle element of show don't tell buried deep within the advice is that you need to know your reader. You need to predict what they are going to think as best you can. Your writing needs to do the right thing at the right moment. When stories go wrong, it's often a mismatch between what the writer expects the reader to be thinking and what the reader is actually thinking. You know how the story ends because you're the one who came up with the story. The reader doesn't, and ideally you want your writing to be conveyed in the same way. You want it written as if you don't necessarily know the outcome. You don't know the context of events. You don't know how things are going to play out. Ultimately, it's about matching up the reader feelings and thoughts with what is conveyed in the writing. When you don't have this match, that's often when stories go wrong. Unlike this video, which was a good match between you and I because you watched the whole thing. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.